Hey everybody, hope you are well, and that you're enjoying these videos. All right, so we're moving right along. We're starting chapter 12 today, Monopolistic Competition. So first we did perfectly competitive markets, and then we did Monopoly, and now we're doing Monopolistic Competition. Just like you probably guessed, it is kind of a mixture between competition and having many providers and Monopoly, where we have a firm that can sort of set their own price because they have some sort of original unique product. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so monopolistic competition. There is a kind of a spectrum I want you to think about. If on one side is perfectly competitive markets, and then on the other side is monopoly, okay? And we'll make kind of a spectrum like this. Monopolistic competition, you kind of think of them as kind of in the middle somewhere, all right? So that's kind of the way I want you to think about it. So previously, right, we talked about perfectly competitive marketplaces, and we talked about how perfectly competitive markets promote social welfare, meaning it's the most efficient and it's the best. Monopolies do not. Why? Because down here, I guess we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but monopolist charges too much and they produce too little, right? And it has this deadweight loss, okay? So like I drew on the previous slide, perfectly competitive markets and monopolies are market structures often at opposite extremes. And like perfectly competitive firms, a monopolist tries to maximize its profits. In this type of market structure today, we're going to learn about monopolistically competitive. I know it's a mouthful. They also try to maximize their profits. So here's the questions we're going to say. Hey, what on earth is this monopolistic competition? And why is it so hard to say? What are the differences among monopolistic competition, competitive markets, and monopolies? So these are the three main sorts of market structures that we're learning about thus far. And finally, we'll ask this question: why do we now suddenly have scope for advertising in monopolistic competition? If you think about it, there was no need for advertising in perfect competition nor in monopoly, but there is in monopolistic competition. So let's explain what monopolistic competition is. Okay, so we have many different firms. Hey, this sounds like perfect competition. Here, this is the thing that's different. But products are differentiated. So not everybody's selling the exact same product. And that's actually the only difference between perfect competition and monopolistic competition. As before, there is free entry and exit. All right, so this one and this one look just like perfect competition, and this one is the one that they're a little bit different. Because if you recall, in perfect competition, all the products were the same. What do I mean by product differentiation? Well, I mean that there's a process by which firms use to make the product more attractive by contrasting its unique qualities with competing products. So here's something important to understand. When I'm talking about monopolistic competition, I'm talking about product differentiation. That's the only way that this is different than perfect competition, product differentiation. Now, the products are still kind of the same as everybody else's, but they engage in advertising to make you believe that they're more different. All right, so some examples of monopolistic competition can include fast food restaurants, clothing retailers, gas stations, hair salons, right? Any sort of thing that any market where they sell a very similar product, but they engage in advertising or to make you think that it's better than other people's product. All right, so if I were to put it in a chart, I would put it something like this, right? Perfectly competitive markets on this side, monopolies on this side. So we have many sellers, only one seller. Here we have the same product. Over here we have only one product because there's only one firm. And here in the middle we have these differentiated products. Notice I didn't write different products because they might not actually be different from each other, but they engage in advertising to make you believe that they're different. Okay, and so we have free entry and exit. Here we have low barriers to entry and exit, basically free. You can think of this as free entry and exit. And the big key here is there's something that's keeping the monopoly a monopolist. There are barriers to entry. You can't just get in. Okay. All right, let's talk more about this differentiated products, because as you probably can guess, this is the main difference between monopolistic competition and perfectly competitive markets. All right, so what are some ways that firms differentiate their products? Well, they might differentiate on style or type, right? You're familiar with Hollister or Urban Outfitters. These are firms that say, hey, yeah, I know we sell shirts like everybody else, but this is an Urban Outfitter shirt, or this is a Hollister shirt. It's better somehow, you know, than other people's shirts. Another way is on location. Okay. Or another way is on quality. So we might differentiate products like 7-Eleven. They're on every corner. It's kind of what we think about it. You might be willing to go and buy something at the 7-Eleven, even though it's a little more expensive because it's closer to you. Or quality. Think about these two firms, right? These both are kind of fast food taco places, but which one is known for kind of being more healthy or fresher, right? Whether or not it actually is or not is completely different. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying one of these firms, Chipotle, is the firm that makes you believe that their firm is providing burritos that are fresher, healthier, something different. You might be like, hey, there's no way Chipotle is exactly the same as Taco Bell. That might be true. That might be true. We're talking about this. They're trying to cultivate in your mind some sort of a preference or a taste. You know, and that brings me to this Latin phrase, de gustibus non est disputandum. You guys are like, what on earth? Let me write it in English. In matters of taste, there can be no disputes. So in other words, what I'm saying is that, yeah, you might think that Chipotle and Taco Bell are the exact same, but we can't really argue about this. This is an opinion, right? And you're right, I'm right, Chipotle's right, Taco Bell's right. In matters of taste, you can't argue with people's opinion. All right, we talked about this earlier kind of in class when we were talking about positive and normative analysis. But the idea behind monopolistic competition is they're trying to make you believe or give you some sort of a taste, right? I don't just mean physical taste with your tongue. I mean any sort of taste or preference. They're trying to give you a preference to think that their product is better than other people's product. Okay, let's look at differences between the three or among the three. So in perfect competition, you have the lowest prices possible and you have the efficient level of output. Remember, the price is actually equal to the minimum point of the ATC curve here, right? So we have the ATC curve going like this, and in the long run, the price is down there, right? It's as low as it possibly can be. Wow, that's really excellent. And we produce at this place efficient scale. Monopoly, on the other hand, no way, man. We have high prices and we have inefficient level of output. Remember that we have they set where their marginal revenue is equal to their marginal cost, and then they go up to the price curve. And so their prices are too high, they're inefficient level of output. Now you should ask, hey, what about monopolistic competition? Well, and if you were guessing somewhere in the middle, you are right. Bing, 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 good job. Let me show you on the graph what it ends up looking like, okay? So here's the short run monopolistic competition. Look on this left panel right here first. Okay, notice this looks exactly like a monopolist. And it actually is the exact same graph as a monopolist. We have the demand curve here, right? And then we have the marginal revenue curve there. Remember, it starts at the same spot as the demand curve and has a slope that's twice as steep. Where do they maximize at? Yeah, you're right. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost right here. That is the quantity. Boom. Now, how do they set their price? Do they go straight out here? No, no, no. They go up to the demand curve. Remember, the highest price they can set, and they set this price right here. Now, a couple of things. Notice, we are not at the bottom and the minimum point of the ATC. We're not here. Okay, that would be the place where the perfectly competitive firm would produce at. And so you see the price is higher and the quantities lower as compared to the perfectly competitive firm. Two more things I want you to note on this graph. Second, they are making profits. How do I figure out what profits they're making? Well, if they're making Q quantity, I go up and see how much it's costing per unit. That's from the ATC curve. And so basically, I can think about this a couple ways. One, P times Q, that's the total revenue. ATC times Q, that's the total cost. If I subtract one from the other, I'm left with this rectangle here. That's their profit rectangle. Another way you can think about it is they're making this much money per unit, and they're producing that many units. So I just take the area of that rectangle. That's their profit rectangle. Okay, so that's important. And the other important thing to note is that even though this looks like a monopolist, this demand curve is not the same demand curve as a monopolist. Remember, a monopolist is selling to the entire marketplace. This this monopolistically competitive firm is still only selling to a portion of the marketplace, but it has a downward sloping demand curve. Okay, let's look at a firm now. And so this firm was making profits. Let's say that for some reason, the price of the cost of producing my product went up. So I'm a monopolistically competitive firm, and all of a sudden my ATC curve went up. It means for some reason it's just more expensive to produce. So that jumps us over here. You can see that the ATC curve is above the demand curve at every point. There's no place where I can sell. This is the price that I can sell for. And that's going to make me some profit because my costs are always above the demand curve at every single point. However, this being the short run, the firm still often, in order to cover fixed costs, remember in the short run, the firm still has to make fixed costs. So the firm might still have to produce and cover some of its fixed costs. It clearly won't cover all of it. It will still be a loss. In the future, we want to get out of the marketplace, but we might be stuck in an unprofitable situation in the short run while we wait for the long run so we can sell and exit the industry. Remember the difference between shutdown and exit? Okay, so what do? If they want to make the best of a bad situation, they still go marginal revenue equals marginal cost right here. Okay, and they still go up and they sell it as high as they can. That's that price right there. But notice that the amount that they're going to be selling it for, excuse me, this is the amount they're selling it for. This is the amount that it costs them to make it. That is higher than what they're selling it for. So they're making this much loss per unit and they're making this many units. And so this area here is their loss, okay? So as a quick review, this is their profit, this is their loss in the situation where, these are two different situations, right? If they're making a profit, you measure it here. If they're making a loss, you measure it here. Okay, so in the short run, a monopolistically competitive firm may earn profits or losses. But think about what's going to happen now in the long run, okay? Well, if we talked about what's going to happen if a firm is making losses in the short run. When they get to the long run, they're going to exit. There's going to be fewer firms. The price is going to go up. Everybody's going to be making zero profits. The same on the flip side, if a firm is making profits, other firms are going to try to come in, and in the long run, profits are going to go to zero. You might ask why? Well, let's think about it. What made it in perfect competition that long run profits always went to zero? Well, I know. Anytime firms are making a profit, other firms would come in and take some of that profit away. Anytime firms that were currently in there were making losses, they would leave, and then the price would go up because there's not as many people supplying the good, and profits will go to zero. Exactly the same as in perfect competition. Entry and exit causes the long run profits to go to zero, okay? And so that's really, really important to remember, is that long run profits for perfect competition and for monopolistic competition, in the long run, they only have zero profits. Monopoly, though, they can make actual profits. We're talking about economic profits. All right, let's look at this in the long run. So in the long run, we need to, so this is the long run, we need to have a firm that's making zero economic profits. Okay, so how can we draw this here? Well, we know that a firm is going to set their marginal revenue equal to their marginal cost curve, and we know that they're then going to go up to set the price. Now, in order to make zero profits, we need it to be true that the price is equal to the average total cost, meaning what they're selling it for is exactly equal to what it costs them to produce it. So in order to get that to be true, I need to draw an ATC curve that comes in here just like this and just barely touches a tangent on this one point. Right? If the ATC curve were down here below, then the firm would be making a profit. If the ATC curve were up here above, the firm would be making a loss, but it's not, so let me get rid of those. And the ATC curve just barely touches the demand curve at that point. And so anytime you see a graph that looks like this, then you know the monopolistic competition is in the long run. Okay? Don't forget, the perfect competition, let me just give you a little reminder, when it was in the long run, it was the one where we had the demand curve, remember the horizontal demand curve was flat right there at the point. They're also making zero economic profit. So this is perfect competition in the long run, and this big one right here is monopolistic competition in the long run. They are both making zero economic profits. What's the difference? Horizontal demand curve for perfect competition, downward sloping demand curve for monopolistic competition. That's the only difference between these two graphs. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about these curves. In monopolistic competition and in perfectly competitive markets. Okay. So perfect competition, price is equal to marginal cost. That's what always ends up happening. That was my graph that I drew here, right? Price is equal exactly to marginal cost, right here. Okay. But if you look in monopolistic competition, price is above marginal cost. Let me go back. Let me show you why that is. Right, here's marginal cost way down here. Here's the price right up here. You see there's this area here that they can't lower price. Price is not equal to marginal cost. Why? If they lowered the price way down to marginal cost, they'd be making a loss and they'd be out of business, right? This is actually the lowest price that they can offer, even though it's higher than marginal cost. This is the lowest price they can offer. Any lower price, they are going to go out of business because they will be making a loss. All right, so this difference between, if you take P minus marginal cost, that's that distance between where I just did the squiggly green line, P minus marginal cost, that distance is called the markup. This is actually rather inefficient. This is unfortunate. And it comes because they have a downward sloping demand curve in monopolistic competition. Right. We also know that in perfect competition, price is at the minimum point of the average total cost. That's very, very efficient. In monopolistic competition, price is higher than the minimum point of the average total cost curve. Okay, let's go ahead and compare those on the graph. All right, so here we have well, you can look at it. This is monopolistic competition. This is perfect competition. How can you tell? This has got a horizontal demand curve. This has got a downward sloping demand curve. Why is this downward sloping? Well, this is because people, for some reason, believe that the products are different in monopolistic competition, whereas, remember, in perfect competition, everybody's selling the same product, so they're not willing to pay anything more for it. Here, they might be willing to pay more if they think it's better. Okay, so a couple of key pieces to see. Look, price is equal to average total cost of both of these. Price is equal to average total cost, so they're both making zero economic profits. But over here in monopolistic competition, it's not at the minimum point of the average total cost curve. Notice that's the minimum point of the average total cost curve. We would like it to have the price be lower at the minimum average total cost. That's most efficient for society. Notice, ding, 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 we have this at in the perfect competition graph. So our price is too high. And don't forget the distance between price and marginal cost, this area here, that's called markup. So that's one big problem, is markup. The other big problem is that we're not producing at efficient scale. Efficient scale is that thing we were talking about earlier, minimum point on the average total cost curve. That's the cheapest place for our society to produce. We would like the firm to produce at efficient scale. Notice it does over here in perfect competition. It produces at efficient scale. It does not in monopolistic competition. The difference between what they actually produce versus what we would want them to produce, if we put on our socially benevolent dictator hat, right? That's where we want them to produce at, on our socially benevolent dictator hat, is called excess capacity. This is weird. Don't get this confused. So many students think, oh, excess capacity, they're producing too much. No, monopolistic competition, look, it's actually producing too little. Excess capacity means they're producing too little. We want them to produce more. That's what excess capacity means. All right. So as you can see, here's the markup problem, and we have the excess capacity problem. So those are the two main issues that happen in monopolistic competition that perfect competition does not have. Okay. You can see that all of this problem actually comes because of the downward sloping demand curve. If you could, let me remove if you could take this demand curve and make it horizontal here, right, where I have this, right, so you kind of like take this demand curve and you swing it around and make it horizontal, just in theory, it would take away all these problems. You can see that the markup and the excess capacity go away. Well, also what I've done is I've made this into a perfectly elastic demand curve that is the same as a perfect competition. Okay, so basically what I did is I turned the monopolistic competition into perfect competition. Okay, so let's talk about scale, or how much output they make, right? So in perfect competition, in the long run, the firm produces at the minimum ATC point. We call that efficient scale. In the long run, the firm produces an excess capacity, right? That's less than efficient scale. Don't forget that excess capacity is less than efficient scale. So once again, we see that right here. The excess capacity comes up, and it's right there. Now you might think, well, we should, if we can make it better for society for producing more, well, why not produce more? Okay. Well, go back to this graph. In order to produce more than here, in order to produce at this point, they would have to offer that price, but notice it's under the ATC curve, okay? They would be losing money. It's more profitable to produce at excess capacity. It's actually the only way that they can break even with zero economic profits. If they produce more, they would be losing. All right, let's compare this to perfect competition, okay? Perfect competition, because they're horizontal demand curve, they can operate at the minimum point of ATC. And overall output is definitely higher in this case, the perfect competition case. All right, let's ask then, is monopolistic competition efficient? Hopefully you can say, no, of course not. It has two problems. What are those two problems? Well, we call them markup and excess capacity, right? The ATC is higher compared to perfect competition. They're not producing at efficient scale. That's excess capacity. They're producing at a place on the ATC curve that's higher. And also then we have the markup, where the price is greater than marginal cost. As a socially benevolent dictator, right, if we put on our socially benevolent dictator hats, what do we want? What's best for society? We want firms to be producing at the lowest point on the ATC curve, and we also want their price to be equal to their marginal cost. So, should the government intervene? Well, let's think. What could the government do? Force them to sell their product for a lower price? No, because they're already making zero long-run profits because there are no barriers, right? And so if you do regulate the firms and make them sell for a lower price, you're going to put them out of business because they're already earning zero economic profits. And then if you put firms out of business, we might have fewer firms, we might make more inconveniences and fewer choices. And so that's a problem. You know, it might be true that the inefficiency, even though we've identified that there is in fact inefficiency, it might be true that inefficiency is not large enough to warrant government intervention, right? So this monopolistic competition is kind of a weird market structure. It is a situation where we really, because of the downward sloping demand curve, because they've advertised and they've made people believe, maybe falsely, that their product is actually better, it leads this inefficiency. I guess what the best thing to do is kind of repeal some of this or get rid of some of the advertising and help consumers see that it's actually really pretty much the same product. And then you wouldn't have downward sloping demand curves. Firms wouldn't be able to charge markup, and it would start looking more like a perfectly competitive marketplace. Okay, so even though there are some inefficiencies, they might be small, they might be removed by the removal of this kind of advertising, which is making people believe weird things, but we can't quite ask them to lower their price or to produce more because it would send them out of business. Okay, so that's all for right now. We're gonna finish this in the next video. Take care.